people with their feet on the desk reading the newspaper. There were no active investigations. There were some indictments that had to be dismissed because of failings.
In the early years of the 20th century, New York became the stage for a new kind of power. Immigrants from Italy, many of them poor and struggling, brought with them traditions of loyalty, family, and silence. Out of this background, the Mafia began to grow. At first, it looked like small groups trying to survive, running protection schemes in their neighborhoods. But soon, these groups united into powerful families. They controlled gambling, loan sharking, drugs, and even labor unions. Their influence spread into every corner of the city. By the 1930s and 40s, the Mafia had become a secret empire. The bosses lived in the shadows but ruled with fear. They made money not only from crime but also by buying police, politicians, and judges. Ordinary people feared them, and many respected them because they provided what the government did not: protection, jobs, and sometimes even justice. The Mafia leaders built their power on silence, the code of Omerta. No one dared to talk. For decades, the Mafia was untouchable. They were seen as legends, men like Charles, Lucky, Luciano, who helped shape the 5 families that would dominate New York. Each family had its boss, underboss, and soldiers, and together they created a structure that could not be easily broken. The Mafia became more than crime. It became a way of life in New York, shaping the city's dark side for generations. Control of New York by the 1950s, the Mafia was not just a criminal group, it was the hidden hand guiding New York. The 5 families, Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno, ruled the city like kings. Their reach went far beyond backroom deals and dark alleys. They controlled the docks, where every shipment had to pay a price. They had their men inside construction, trucking, and the garment industry. Even restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos felt their grip. If money moved in New York, a part of it went to the Mafia. These bosses did not need to shout or show force. A simple order passed down through their soldiers could destroy a business or make it thrive. Union leaders answered to them, and strikes could be called or ended depending on what the Mafia wanted. Politicians and police officers were often on their payroll. With this mix of fear and influence, the bosses became untouchable. FBI steps in. For years, the FBI had treated organized crime as scattered street gangs, not as a national threat. That view changed in the late 1950s when law enforcement discovered that the Mafia was not just local crime. It was a powerful network stretching across the country. A turning point came in 1957, when police stumbled upon a secret Mafia meeting in Appalachian, New York. Dozens of bosses and underbosses were caught together, proving the Mafia was real and highly organized. The public was shocked, and the FBI could no longer look away. At first, progress was slow. The Mafia thrived on silence, and witnesses were too afraid to speak. But the FBI started changing its methods. Instead of chasing small-time criminals, they began building cases against bosses. New strategies were used: long surveillance, hidden cameras, and most importantly, wiretaps. Agents listened for months, even years, piecing together the secret codes and conversations that revealed how the families operated. By the 1970s, under the leadership of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover's successors, the agency finally placed the Mafia at the top of its priorities. Special squads were created in New York to focus only on the 5 families. Their mission was clear: find the bosses, break their power, and bring them to court. It was the beginning of a war between federal agents and the most dangerous criminals New York had ever known. Wiretaps and spies, the FBI knew that to break the Mafia, they had to hear what the bosses said behind closed doors. Guns and raids would not work against men who rarely touched the crimes themselves. So the Bureau turned to technology: wiretaps, bugs, and hidden microphones. Agents worked in secret, sneaking into social clubs, cars, and even homes to plant devices. It was risky, but the rewards were priceless. For the first time, the FBI could listen to the very heart of Mafia life. Wiretaps alone were not enough. The FBI also recruited insiders, spies who once served the families but turned against them. Some were low-level soldiers, others were trusted aides. They gave the FBI maps of the Mafia's world: who reported to whom, which rackets made the most money, and where orders began. This mix of hidden ears and human sources gave the FBI a weapon more powerful than bullets: knowledge. And with knowledge came the first real chance to strike at the bosses who thought they were untouchable. Cracking the code, the Mafia had always believed that their secret language would protect them. Bosses never used clear words. Instead, they spoke in hints, jokes, or simple phrases that carried hidden meaning. To outsiders, these talks sounded harmless. But the FBI, armed with thousands of hours of recordings, began to study every word. Agents, lawyers, and translators sat for months, building dictionaries of Mafia slang. They matched phrases to real-world crimes, proving what the bosses meant when they spoke of piece of work or sending a message. Breaking the code was like pulling back a curtain. Suddenly, the FBI could follow money trails, predict violent orders, and even stop murders before they happened. What once seemed impossible, tying the bosses directly to crimes, was now within reach. The evidence was powerful, because it was the mafia's own voices damning them. Big arrests by the 1980s, the FBI's years of listening, spying, and decoding finally paid off. With Rye-Show laws in hand and mountains of taped evidence, prosecutors moved in for the strike. One of the most famous blows came in 1985, when federal agents launched the Mafia Commission trial. For the first time in history, the heads of New York's 5 families faced trial together. Men who once seemed untouchable, bosses like Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno of the Genovese family and Anthony, Tony Ducks, Corallo of the Lucchese family, were brought into court in handcuffs. The sight shook the city. These were men who had ruled for decades, suddenly standing powerless before judges and juries. The trial lasted months, filled with testimony, secret recordings, and FBI evidence that painted a clear picture of how the mafia ruled New York. In 1986, the verdict came. 8 mafia bosses and leaders were found guilty. They were sentenced to long prison terms, some even for life. These arrests sent shockwaves through organized crime. Street soldiers who once looked up to their bosses began to fear the FBI more than rival families. The message was clear: no one, not even the commission itself, was beyond the law. The empire of silence was breaking, and the FBI had shown the world that the mafia could bleed. Courtroom battles. The arrests were only the beginning. Once inside the courtroom, the mafia bosses fought with everything they had. Expensive lawyers filled the defense benches, arguing that the FBI's wiretaps were illegal or that the evidence was weak. They claimed the government was trying to destroy Italian, American culture, not organized crime. Judges and juries listened as lawyers painted the bosses as ordinary businessmen. But the FBI's recordings told a different story. Every tape, every coded phrase, showed the truth. These men ruled through fear, violence, and greed. The trials became a spectacle. Reporters crowded outside, sketch artists captured the bosses' faces, and New Yorkers followed every headline. Witnesses who dared to testify often wore disguises or were placed under protection. Some mobsters even broke the code of silence, turning informant to save themselves. Their words cut deeper than any FBI file, revealing how murders were ordered, how money flowed, and how the families kept control. Despite the mafia's attempts to twist the law in their favor, the courtroom victories piled up for prosecutors. Life sentences replaced lavish parties, and concrete cells replaced corner clubs. Each guilty verdict struck at the heart of the mafia's myth of invincibility. The bosses had once ruled New York's streets like kings. Now, their power crumbled in front of the world, and their empire of fear was collapsing under the weight of justice. End of the bosses. By the 1990s, the mafia that once ruled New York with iron fists was broken. The FBI's relentless pressure, combined with the power of the Rye-Show Act, had sent boss after boss to prison. Entire families that once controlled industries and neighborhoods were leaderless. Without their generals, the soldiers fought among themselves, weakening the very structure that had made them strong. The commission, once the secret council that balanced power, was shattered. The mafia was no longer a hidden empire. It was a wounded giant struggling to survive. Some bosses died behind bars, others grew old in prison, and a few tried to run their families from their cells but failed. Fear of betrayal spread inside the ranks, as more mobsters turned informants to avoid long sentences. The once unbreakable code of silence, omerta, had collapsed. The FBI had done what many thought impossible. It had dragged the most feared men in New York out of the shadows and into the light. For the city, it was the end of an era. Streets that once bowed to mafia rule were free from their grip. Businesses no longer paid silent taxes to crime families. The mafia still existed, but it was no longer the unstoppable force of the past. The fall of the bosses was proof that no empire of crime, no matter how strong, could last forever against persistence, law, and time.